everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee. The bell has chimed and it's 5 o'clock and we now begin. If you've got any mobile phones, can you please switch them to silent? This meeting is a public meeting and is being live streamed for the public to view. There is no fire test planned today, so hopefully there won't be one today. If there is one, then there is a procedure that we need to follow, which is well signposted. Quickly move on to the introductions of everyone in the room today. I am Councillor Mohammed Mahroof and I'm the Chair of Audit and Standards for today's meeting, and we'll start with David.
David Hollis, General Counsel and Monitoring Officer.
James Brackley, Independent Co-opted Member.
Councillor Gareth Slater, Southey, and I've brought my little one with me.
Fran Belbin, Councillor for Firth Park Ward and Deputy Chair of the Committee.
Matt Dwyer, Councillor for Burley Ward.
Robert Rice, representing Ecclesfield Parish Councillor as an observer.
Mahroof Ralph, Netherridge and Sharrow.
Simon Clement Jones, Bridgeford Greenhill.
Diane Hurst, Richmond Ward.
Bell, Democratic Services Officer.
And we've got two people joining online as well, so if you'd like to introduce yourselves. David.
Yeah, David Irvin, the independent person for Sheffield and Barnsley.
Linda.
And Linda Hunter, Senior Finance Manager for Internal Audit and Risk Management.
Thank you for that, everybody. Apologies for absence. I don't seem to have any. No, thank you. Exclusion of the public and press. No items to exclude the public or press today. Any members want to declare any interest? No, thank you, sir. I thought you put your hand up there, Councillor Ralph. If you're doing this, I'm used to auctioneering, you see, so when you flicked your pen there, I thought you were declaring something. So no declarations of interest. Minutes of the previous meeting, I'm assuming everybody's read them. And if so, is there any changes or amendments anybody's seen there? Or shall we accept it as true record? Yep. Fine, the minutes of the previous meeting are approved. There's two items on the agenda today. One is item 7, which is annual standards report, which will be presented by David Hollis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. So this is the annual report. It's a report drafted to be of the Committee to full Council, and subject to approval today will go forward to the next available full Council meeting. It's the 8th such report that we've done, and it's the annual report of the Merged Audit and Standards Committee. And this covers the period from January 2024 to December 2024. The role of Audit and Standards is set out in paragraph 2.1 of the report, particularly in relation to standards it sets out there, which is to promote and maintain high standards of conduct by councillors, co-opted members and representatives on committees and subcommittees, to assist councillors, co-opted members and representatives to observe the member code of conduct, to advise the council on the adoption or revision of the members code of conduct and protocols relating to councillor and officer behaviour. Those are part of the Constitution, so they are within the remit of full council to approve those, and there is a recommendation is the next item on the agenda. To monitor the operation of the members' code of conduct, to advise, train or arrange to train councillors, co-opted members and representatives on matters relating to the code of conduct, to monitor, review and make recommendations to the council with regard to the learning and development policy for councillors, co-opted members and representatives, to discharge functions of dealing with complaints against councillors and co-opter members as set out in the procedure. And there have been no matters from this year referred through to the committee to deal with through either of its through its subcommittee. To advise the council on the adoption and revision of its whistleblowing policy, monitor that policy, and to review procedures relating to gifts, hospitality, and previously to monitor complaints and the council's response to complaints to the Ombudsman. That, since the revised guidance from the Ombudsman, now sits with the Strategy and Resources as the appropriate member. So this committee has 7 members, which, as other committees on the council, is appointed proportionately, and there will be a maximum of 3 non-voting co-opted members. Meetings of the subcommittee when they're needed, and as I say, there's been one this year but related to the previous year, are arranged as and when required. The subcommittee is made up of 3 members, usually the chair, deputy chair and another member of the committee, plus a non-voting co-opter member is also required to sit on the subcommittee. Monitoring officer supports the committee. I've been ably assisted this year by Robert Parkin and Sherry Grant as deputy monitoring officers, and I want to thank them for that, their assistance that they've given. The role of the monitoring officer in relation to this committee is set out in paragraph 4.1. Also want to note and thank that further support to the committee was provided by initially Philippa Burdett and now Jay Bell, Democratic Services officers, and Sarah Hyde within Democratic Services team, who assists with the standards complaints and manages those on behalf of myself and the deputy monitoring officers. If we now move on to a review of the complaints that there have been this year, the number of complaints and a breakdown by findings is set out in paragraph 5.1. As I will give my usual caveat for this report, that it's always difficult, a little bit difficult, when reporting on the standards matters, because they are subject to confidentiality, both for the benefit of the complainant and for the member if the matter does not go any further, and therefore, whilst given as much information as we can, there is specific details of each of these that we do not go into. So within the year, the calendar year, we received 21 complaints in total, which was compared to 19 in the same period up to 2023. It's a slight increase, however, 13 of those were rejected in the period compared to only 6 rejected in 2023. The table in 5.1 gives the numbers there, and then 5.3 gives the reason for rejection. They are varied, but mainly they relate to the fact that they actually aren't matters which would fall within the standards regime as it is required to be operated by the Localism Act 2011, because that act, the regime is set out in law as to what is and isn't a standards matter. So you will see from those table a number of reasons. Not acting in capacity of councillor is one of the ones that comes up quite regularly, and having had elections this year, it was concerned election leafleting, which again falls under effectively the same banner as not acting in the capacity of a councillor when somebody is concerned in election campaigning or political groups are sending out election material. Freedom of political expression is another matter which must be taken into account, and it's only where it's clearly not going to be a standards matter that it would be rejected under this this category, and there is one of those referred to that was dealt with in that way this year. Anonymous complaint, whilst we sometimes do afford confidentiality, we do not accept anonymous complaints. One was anonymous and a false email was given, so no contact could be made, and therefore that one was rejected. Not a councillor at the time the complaint occurred was another reason, and some are referred to the corporate complaint system because that was the more appropriate way of dealing with them than raising corporate standards, corporate issues, as opposed to being member standards. The 5.4 sets out the 6 that were rejected as take no action following an assessment in consultation with the independent person. There is a crossover in these. Sometimes there are the same reasons for rejecting as the rejected category. Quite often what will happen is that it might be unclear as to whether it should be rejected outright, and further inquiries are made either by seeking the view of the elected member in accordance with the protocol or seeking further information elsewhere, and that brings it within this category, having embarked on the procedure and then taking no further action. You will see that the reasons for rejection match those in rejected once they get to this. One complaint was withdrawn because the issue had been resolved, and there was a speculative inquiry that did not result in a formal complaint. The hearing subcommittee met once in the period, but that related to a complaint that had been issued in the previous period. It had followed a lengthy investigation, but was then dealt with within this period. 5.7 just gives a bit more information on the reasons why there could take no action or matters may be rejected. Paragraph 6 deals then with independent persons and the co-opted members of the committee. Independent persons are a requirement of the Localism Act. The role is an advisory one. They do not have a vote or a member of any council committee. I see David Irvin was on the call. We have 3 independent persons, Karen Widowson, Martin Thorpe and David Irvin. Their input is invaluable for myself and the other deputy monitoring officers when we are looking at complaints. They give us that independent overview, a different perspective, and allow us to look at these and make sure that we are looking at these through all possible angles and make sure that the right action is being taken before we make a final decision. The law sets out when an independent person must be involved, but in Sheffield we tend to involve them much more than is required by law, and will tend to speak to them on most matters before making any sort of decision, including a rejection, unless it's absolutely obvious that it shouldn't be going any further. So I want to thank all of the independent persons for the time that they give to myself and the other deputy monitoring officers. It can be a challenge to recruit suitable volunteers. I think we are lucky to have 3 very good independent members, and we share that role with Barnsley at the moment and the South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Authority. So again, I want to thank them. Co-opted members, and we have James here today as the independent co-opted member. Not mandatory, but the SIP for Good Practice suggests that should include at least 2 co-opted members of the committee. Their role is to supplement the expertise of the existing membership and to provide an expertise overview on the committee. They are non-voting, but that doesn't mean to say that their intervention and their expertise is not crucial to this committee in understanding the matters that are before it. The guidance is that there should be up to 3, but should be 2. We currently have 1 co-opted member, which is James, and that is because Alison Howard, who you will all remember attending on many occasions, has stepped down from her role as independent co-opted member. She was appointed back in 2020, had an initial 4-year term, and then agreed to stay on for an extended term. I think she was appointed right in COVID, and therefore it must have been particularly difficult to be an independent member at that time. And she was, since I've taken over this role, and before I took over this role, but was involved with standards matters as a deputy monitoring officer, the only independent member I knew before James was appointed as well. So I particularly want to thank her for the time and the expertise that she's given over the years, and for the assistance that she's given for me. And I hope the committee will also share that view as well. So because CIF good practice is to have at least 2, we will be appointing to the vacancy as soon as possible. An advert is currently live and there's a closing date of the 13th of April. And we've tried to share that advert as widely as we can. Parish and town councils. So as a monitoring officer, I'm also the monitoring officer for the 3 parish and town councils that we have in the area, and the numbers of complaints are reflected in the numbers reported through 2024. I offer training and briefings on the code of conduct to the parish councils, and I have a relationship with the town clerk as well. And Councillor Rice is here as well to observe as membership of Ecclesfield, yes, get that right. The other role that's undertaken is training and development of members. The member development working group is relatively recent and was being changed the way in training, and recommended we change the way that the training and induction programme for new councillors was delivered. That used to be an intense 2-day programme with consecutive sessions, and it was felt to be overwhelming. So therefore we've changed that for the new intake for this year, which is a half-day training programme, which included a welcome from the Chief Operating Officer, a talk then on decision-making and governance, and unfortunately they had an hour of me on ethical standards as well, and then practical support for new councillors and IT issues as well. There was then offered a range of induction training and briefing sessions over the space of the next few months, and the themes that were covered are all there in paragraph 8.4. The breadth of those was intended to cover the matters that councillors were most likely to be required to understand throughout their term. 8.5 details the recommended training that was also offered to newly elected members, and consultations are currently taking place to decide what is needed, what might be looked to revise that, and where those are the appropriate ones. Newly elected members were also provided with an information pack. There was also training given on climate emergency, but due to a turnover of councillors, with fewer councillors being trained in climate awareness, and therefore new models were made available to councillors this year via both SharePoint and GoLearn, and all members were encouraged to complete that training. EDI is an area that we think we can further improve. There was what was quite an intensive online course that was available, and therefore work is being done with specialist EDI officers within the council to look at how further training on EDI can be undertaken. As well as standards and the training matters, this committee has had oversight of the policy and corporate issues in relation to the whistleblowing policy review, the review of the members' code of conduct and procedures for dealing with complaints, and has also considered the information governance annual report. Others of areas of work that are undertaken by me as the monitoring officer is to ensure that all councillors keep up to date their register of interest form in relation to disclosable pecuniary interests and other interests, and also particular help has been given to the parish and town council in this municipal year. The year ahead will be quite an interesting one in this area, because the government is currently undertaking a consultation, or has just closed a consultation. We're waiting to see the outcome in relation to changes to strengthening the standards and code of conduct framework. The consultation included a number of matters which would be quite a departure from the current arrangements, which include having a mandatory minimum prescribed code of conduct. At the present time, codes of conduct are entirely a matter for each local authority to determine. The Localism Act says that they must have regard to the Nolan principles, but other than that, the local authorities are free to adopt whatever code of conduct they want. Most local authorities, and the council does this, adopt the LGA code of conduct, but it's not mandatory to do so. So one of the things that is being proposed is have a mandatory minimum. The current proposal is to allow local authorities to then have their own arrangements on top of that, but not to depart from the mandatory issues. The other thing that they are consulting on is the requirement to make it mandatory to have a standards committee. So again, that's not mandatory. We have one in Sheffield, so that wouldn't affect us, but it is one of the things that they are looking at. Publishing investigation outcomes. Their consultation was looking at whether investigation outcomes are published in all cases, or whether it's only in cases where a breach has been found. That would be a particularly interesting one to see the outcome on that, particularly where matters are dealt with informally or advice is given rather than taking them through to a formal hearing or an investigation. Other matters are requiring the completion of investigations if a member stands down. At the moment, the standard only relates to current councillors, and therefore, if either through a effluxion of the period that a member is elected, or because they stand down, there is an outstanding standards complaint, then that cannot be concluded. What's not clear is whether they will look at allowing complaints post a period for a councillor that relates to a period when they were a councillor. Perhaps some of the major things that they are looking at bringing in are the sanctions that are available. At the present time, sanctions are relatively limited, although we, thankfully in Sheffield, we do not need to rely upon them particularly. But they are looking at suspensions and looking at suspensions of up to 2 years, withholding allowances and premises and admission to premises and facilities, interim suspensions, which is particularly interesting given that investigations can take some time to be concluded, and if that results in a councillor being found not to have breached the code of conduct, being subject to an interim suspension can cause significant issues, not least for the constituents who are without representation for that period. Disqualification for multiple breaches, and that they're talking about a potential 5-year disqualification for two breaches and for gross misconduct. The potential for appeals both by a councillor who's been found to have been in breach of the code of conduct, but also appeals for a complainant where a breach has not been upheld. What's not clear is where that route of appeal would be to, and one of the things they are looking at is having a national appeals body to consider those. Part of the representation that's been made is whether the national body should be the body that decides upon suspensions as well. And how the public sector equality duty engages with those changes that they're doing. So I will bring any update from that consultation, any proposals at a future date to the committee so that we can consider how those impact us at Sheffield. So finally, the recommendation is that the committee receives and notes this report, acknowledging the work of the Audit and Standards Committee in January to December. Thanks Alison Howard for her contribution and commitment to the committee as an independent co-optee over the past few years, and forwards the report to the next available full council for endorsement. Thank you, Chair, and I don't know whether there are any particular questions.
Thank you, David. Thank you for a very comprehensive presentation there. I will open it up to questions. Councillor Mahroof and then Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you for that, David. Just want to check some of the figures we've got here. There are a total of 21 complaints in 2024. However, only 19 of those complaints seem to have been identified. We seem to be missing complaint 09 and complaint 20. I assume one of them was a complaint that was withdrawn, but are you able to identify the reason for the other missing one?
I suspect that the speculative entry inquiry was given an entry number as well, but I'll double check that and get back to you, Councillor.
Thank you. And my final question is, I appreciate you gave some figures on 2023, and the number of complaints seems to have increased, but and similarly with the number of rejected complaints also seems to have increased. So good on one hand, bad on the other, I guess. However, were you able to identify any data that allows us to compare this to the last 5 or 10 years, please?
Thank you, Councillor Mahroof. Yes, we have. I don't know, Jay, if you're able to... Oh, has everybody got... Right.
Apologies, I've missed it on the desk. Thank you.
So we have been able to pull that data off. I think what it does show, and I've not printed it off myself. Looking at my eyesight.
I mean, it does show that there's a significant increase from 2021 to today. But, I mean, we had 13 in 21, 14 in 22, 19 last year, in 23, 21 this year. So there seems to be an upward trend, which, I mean, if I was a member of the public, I'd find that quite concerning. But I guess there's nuances within that, I assume.
So I think there's an upward trend, and I think that's probably because there's more acknowledgement and more understanding of the route to be able to complain. And I think some things that happened over time, and there's the trees and other issues that have risen, probably have raised awareness of this route, and I think that's probably one of the reasons for the numbers coming through. What I haven't been able to discern from the figures is an increase of actual complaints being upheld or particular changes in behaviour that would be the reason for the increase. I think the increase for the number of rejected is probably that awareness of the route to complain probably isn't allied to an understanding of what the standards complaint is. And I think some of them are matters that, whilst they're raised, aren't actually standards issues, and they probably didn't come through before, but we are now noting them and recording them, and that we are rerouting them as appropriate where they are to be rerouted, or actually where they don't raise issues that can be dealt with, then we are letting the individuals know. Particularly over, one of the things is we get complaints about is lack of action by councillors over things that are council delivery, where it seems to be I've complained about something to my councillor and it's still the same, and that comes through as a standards complaint, and that is not a standards issue.
That's fine. I think that makes quite a lot of sense. Appreciate that, David. Thank you.
Thank you for that, David. Councillor Advice.
Yeah, mine was on the increased rise, and I think you've answered it, but my question was also about, there was a general election last year. A lot of this seems to be linked to political speech, you know, people making incorrect complaints about just standard political business, because a lot of councillors stood. And then my other one was hopefully a quick one to answer is, there's a lot of training. I know I've missed some of that. And is there a training log that the council keeps for each councillor? Because it's something a lot of employers would do, so you know what people have and haven't done.
There will be a record of that. It's not publicly available, but I'm sure if any councillor wants to check what they've undertaken, we can inform them of that.
Councillor Belbin.
Thank you. Firstly, I just wanted to add my thanks to Alison Howard as the independent co-optee onto the committee for all the work that she did while she was with us. And then I really wanted to talk about the training aspect of the report. I'm the chair of the Member Development Working Group. So firstly, again, just to thank the members of that group who sit on that, and the officers who've been supporting that group, and indeed implementing the actions of the decisions that have come out of that group. And thanks for capturing in the report, David, so much of the work that has been done by the group. I'd also like to thank some of the external organisations that have offered us training to support us in our role as councillors. That's particularly Citizens Advice Sheffield, who have been offering us training both in the use of their portal to refer people, members of the public, to their portal, but also helping councillors to understand some of the basic advice that we can perhaps offer to help our constituents before they have to get more specialised advice, perhaps from citizens' advice. And the Snowdrop Project, who've offered us the training around human trafficking. We spent quite a bit of the time over the last year looking at role profiles for different roles that councillors perform within the council. So, for example, being chair of a committee, being a deputy chair, and those kinds of roles. And where we're heading over the next year, I think we'll be really looking at how we can support councillors with the specific skills that they need for those roles. And we also fed the those role profiles into the independent remuneration panel to assist them with coming up for their recommendations for councillor remuneration. So I think there's been some good work done by the committee over the year, and we will continue to feed into that member development offer. I did just want to raise something in 8.10. It talks about an offer of a training course on equality and diversity, a level 2 certificate, and we did discuss that in the member development working group and agreed that we would pilot it, I think, by offering it to members of the Senior Officer Employment Committee. But I'm not sure that offer ever actually went. It says there was low take-up, but I'm not sure the offer ever actually went out to members of that committee. So, so I think that's probably why there was low take-up, and not because there isn't a commitment amongst councillors to undertake that kind of training. Although we were also, looking to see if there were easier ways to deliver it rather than a formal certificate. And whether there were better ways that we could improve take-up of training around equality and diversity. So just a few points around that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Belbin. Well, I'll double check on that and make sure that is offered out. Councillor Dwyer, you are right that elections do tend to generate more complaints about electioneering and disagreement over political points as opposed to proper standards matters. Chair, if you may indulge me, I thanked Alison. I've thanked the independent persons. I'm not sure if I mentioned James, but I'm not sure if I thanked him for his contribution as an independent person. But if I didn't, then I'd do so now.
Councillor Rice, representing the parish councils.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was actually thought of this question on the back of Councillor Dwyer's contribution, especially as I kind of double hat my position as both a member of Sheffield City Council and a member of Ecclesfield Parish Council. And with the general election last year, my question is on the overlap within political office and running for it, and whether there is kind of clarity within the process and also in the text of any policy and procedure as to whether, when it is defined as in the role as the councillor, whether there is a formal line as to where a parish councillor stops, a city councillor starts, and if a city councillor is standing for elected office in another kind of body, whether there is a formal line within there so that we can make a reasonable judgment as to who is which body takes up the standards issue.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. You've probably touched on the thing that is probably the point that vexes us as monitoring officers most, which is what is the definition of acting in the role of a councillor. The legislation merely provides for that. It doesn't give any definition of what acting in a role as a councillor is. The only case law we've got predates the Localism Act, although I think the Localism Act sought to enact that case law, which was a case in relation to Ken Livingstone when he was the leader of, I think he was the mayor at that point. It's a difficult one, and as I always say, it's going to be fact specific in each case. Because it's a truism that once elected to the office of councillor, you are always a councillor and a holder of that office. But that doesn't mean to say that you are always acting in that capacity. You have a clear private life where you are not acting in that capacity. Where it gets a bit blurred is when you are acting in public life, but not necessarily acting as a councillor or dealing with council business. And I think that's the bit that is most confusing for people to understand and causes us most angst when we're looking at it and trying to work it out. And we just have to take it on a case-by-case basis. And I'm afraid trying to describe something that said this is where the clear line is almost impossible. Much as though I would love it to be able to do so.
Thank you for the response, and I do hope, looking at my position on both councils, but also as a former parliamentary candidate, whether some consideration, maybe not strict definitions, but maybe a consideration of where kind of the process of drawing those lines in a case-by-case basis, because I do see, especially with the amount of time potentially until the next general election, we have got space to think as to how we approach this issue going forward.
You never know that we may get something coming out of the revisions that may help us with that, but we'll see. But thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, David, for a very comprehensive presentation, and thank you for the debate that's happened on this. Unless there's any other further questions, I'll wind this up with a few observations of my own. Equally, I'd like to thank Alison and the independent members. I think they play a very significant part in making sure the monitoring officer and the monitoring work is done well. I think we are quite proud of the fact that we are quite transparent on these things, and we have clearly shown that the number of complaints that we've been addressing, although remaining static to some extent, have risen, and that's as a result of this being fairly transparent process there in place that we put in place. And I'd like to thank this committee as well. There's been a lot of work. I mean, some of the members, I'm looking at Councillor Clement Jones here and one or two others who have been with this committee for quite some time and have spent a huge amount of work on getting us this far, and that's been followed up by other committee members as well. So we do take this area of annual in this authority, and that's been exemplified by the report that's in front of you today. One thing that you probably didn't mention, David, was the amount of debate we had around the person who's been complained against, and the angst and the difficulty they actually go through whilst the complaint is actually being complaint is actually being addressed. And I think we did put something in somewhere to say that they should be given help as well, because clearly it can be quite a traumatic time for someone when it drags on for 3, 4, 6 months, and whenever that's the situation, we did flag that up. And I've forgotten what we actually said, David.
So formally within the code, the monitoring officer protocol, we made it clear that the access to an independent person applies equally to the member who is complained of it as well. In one case, I have given the deputy monitoring officer to speak to, and we also have the support that is available to officers and members generally through the corporate scheme. We remind members who are the subject of complaints that they can access that as well, just as another area of support for them.
Thank you, David. I thought it was important to raise that because obviously it affects members who are complained against quite significantly as well, and some of the complaints that we've seen recently have been quite significant in themselves. So unless there's any further questions, I'll move on to the recommendation, which unfortunately will have to read because it's official. The Audit and Standards Committee is recommended to A, receive and note this report, acknowledging the work of the Audit and Standards Committee in January to December 2024. A big thank you and a personal thank you to Alison Howard for her contribution and commitment to the committee over the past few years. And C, forwards the report to the next available full council for endorsement. Got that? Is that fine? Thank you. We move on to the next one, and this is also yourself, David, and I think, again, there's been quite a significant amount of work that's been done on this over the last 2 or 3 years as well. So basically, this is receiving a report That doesn't change significantly because we've debated this some time ago as well. But over to you, David, to...
Thank you, Chair. I'll be relatively brief on this because there is a bit of overlap with the report that we've just considered. So we have an annual review of both the Code of Conduct and the Monitoring Officer Protocol, which sets out the procedure for dealing with standards complaints. These were last updated in February of last year. The changes that we made were to remove the consideration subcommittee and move straight to a hearing subcommittee following an investigation. And then several other changes were made. They're set out in 1.3, which I think was strengthening what was already in there, which was what happens if the monitoring officer has a conflict of interest, clarification of the circumstances in which the monitoring officer may make a written complaint in their own name, strengthening and setting out members' rights to make representations during investigation, to participate in a hearing subcommittee, and to make representations before a decision is made that a breach has occurred. Rewording of the sanctions to give a consistent approach to grouped and ungrouped members, and I was grateful for those from parish councils who made representations at that time that that the wording didn't really apply consistently to them. Additional formal sanction in a case where breach is found which relates to the council's IT systems or where members' access to those systems are withdrawn. We did closely define that to where it's relevant to the actual complaint. And I don't know whether the government were watching, but that has now made its way into the consultation. And then clarification of the circumstances in when a complainant may complain to the LGO, which then more clearly reflected the LGO's own guidance. As I said before, we use the LGA, the Local Government Association Model Code. We do update it slightly to make it more applicable to us, but we do adopt that model code. I won't go through 1.5 because I've outlined that in the previous item about what the changes are that are being proposed. So because we've relatively recently, I know it was a year ago, but I think we made a number of tweaks in the years before that, there have been no issues with the operation of either the Code of Conduct, other than the inherent difficulty of understanding when a councillor is acting in that capacity, nor has there been any issues with the operation of the Monitoring Officer Protocol. I'm not recommending any changes to go forward to full council this year. I have asked the independent persons whether they feel that any changes were needed, and they didn't feel any changes were needed either. So that's the recommendation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Ralph, and then Councillor Clement-Jones, and then Councillor Belbin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David, for that. Just want to check one thing, David. In the last 4 years, there have been a total of 67 complaints about councillors. I appreciate you may not have the figures to hand at this moment in time. However, are you able to, if you look at page 63, especially on paragraph 4.3, it says there specifically, in the interests of fairness and natural justice, we believe members who are complained about have a right to know who has made the complaint. We are unlikely to withhold your identity unless there are exceptional circumstances. So really what I'm trying to ask is, out of those 67 complaints, how many have been allowed to be anonymised, or the person complaining be anonymised? I appreciate you won't have those figures to hand at this moment in time, but I think it's really important that members who are listening can see that fairness is taking place.
Out of all the 67, because I wasn't the monitoring officer all that time, I can't categorically say, but I haven't dealt with one where it was confidential. As I said before, we don't allow them to be anonymous. The person has to give their name. We haven't allowed one to be confidential because we didn't think there were any circumstances where it was appropriate.
Thank you.
Councillor Clement-Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I pass my thanks on to Alison, who also really helped us with these kind of code of conduct things. myself too. So, yeah, it's really more of a comment on this in terms of obviously the recommendation is no changes, and I think the times that we've changed it in the past have been in response to the system being stress tested by various complaints that rose beyond the usual. So you know, in the last couple of years, you know, we haven't had those, and so you know, so I'm happy to see no changes to it. I mean, I do think that the standards regime could be doing with change, but me and Dave have had quite a few debates on the various and others in the room on the various options that the people are talking about. As I say, I think it should be very difficult to actually remove or suspend a councillor, indeed, if at all possible, because say we're sent here to represent people, and we shouldn't be prevented from doing that. And you know, as I say, I think you know, the consequences are you know, for democracy, as it were. So yeah, thank you for the report. Thank you for saying that we don't need any changes, because it can be a very painful process. Thank you very much indeed. Cheers.
Thank you. Councillor Belbin.
Thank you. Yes, I also agree with the recommendations of the report, even though they are effectively do nothing, but I think we did do quite a big piece of work on this in the last municipal year. Just for information as well, I was at the Councillors Forum last week where the Minister for Local Government, Jim McMahon, did refer to the whole consultation around standards and so on, and he made it clear that any changes to the regime wouldn't be immediately forthcoming. We wouldn't expect it in the forthcoming devolution bill, for example. It would be part of perhaps a later wave of legislation that would give us more opportunity to consider the results of that consultation. So probably not for the next couple of years. Thanks.
No, thank you, Councillor Belbin. And certainly if they start to move to an independent body, then arrangements are going to have to be made for that to be set up before they bring anything in.
Thank you for that. And what I did forget to say was thank you to the monitoring officer and the monitoring team who have been pulling all this together. I know it's not been easy, and we've been sat on some of these complaints, and it's not very easy at all. It can be quite difficult and traumatic for even the people who are actually on these committees. So thank you for the work that you've done, and thank you for the work that you've done in bringing this about. I mean, the amount of work we actually did to get it this far, and to have a recommendation to say that we don't want to change it any further this year is testimony to the amount of effort that was put in at the time. So it just remains for me to recommend, unless there's any further questions.
If you don't mind, I'm beginning to doubt my answer to Councillor Ralph at the moment, so I will double check and get back to him. But at the moment I can't recollect one, but I'm beginning to doubt my answer now. So I will double check them all and get back to it.
Thank you, David. I appreciate your response on that.
Thank you for that, David. The Audit and Standards Committee is recommended to agree the Monitoring Officer's proposal that there are no changes to be made to the Members' Code of Conduct and procedure for dealing with complaints regarding city, parish and town councillors and co-opted members. Everybody agreed on that? Well, we have total agreement. Thank you. Move on to item number 9, Jay. I think this is the work programme.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. There's nothing specifically to draw to members' attention. I'll not raise anything, but take it as members have read it. But yeah, section 5 just shows some additions, amendments since the last meeting, and then I think we've got one meeting left in April before the AGM. So I'll take that as over to members to approve and to identify any items they wish to consider on the programme.
I think we've only got one committee left before the AGM, and some of the members here might not be here next time. So not that there's an election, but there will be obviously people moving into different work areas and different committees. So I think my concern is for April, which is fine. And after that, I think it will be whoever it may be. But having said that, I've been on this for 6 years now, and Simon has as well, I think, more than that. I know you've done about double figures here, haven't you? So, yeah. So if there's no... Sorry, James.
Yeah, sorry, just 1 or 2 points on the work programme. Just to highlight really, we're in a bit of an odd period of time with the backstop dates on the local accounts. So we've just had a disclaimer opinion on the 23-24 accounts in February, and then we're in there's not quite a long gap until the next backstop date, so the next audit opinion would be February 2026. I think the long-term ambition is to get back to getting an audit opinion in the autumn, but we're in that kind of slight limbo period now. So when the next set of accounts come to us, just to be aware it's on the back of an unaudited set of accounts, and there's quite a long period of time until we get an audit opinion. So I guess one thing just to flag is probably additional scrutiny from us this year on this year's set of accounts, which it says are to be presented in July rather than June. I assume, is that just a delay to the meeting, or is that a delay to the actual publication of the accounts? Do we know?
I'll check with Philip, but I'm assuming that I think the accounts signed by the Chief Finance Officer will be published in June. I think they will then be brought here. But I'll double check that timing.
Okay, well, with that in mind then, we've got an audit plan from KPMG, which is good in the tracker. We might want some sort of interim feedback from them in the autumn rather than wait until the following February. So that was just one point. And then my other question was on the ICO recommendations, which is scheduled for June. I think there was previously a discussion, I'm trying to recall, about whether that was kind of in scope for Audit Committee. So is that just specifically on where the Information Commissioner's Office have made recommendations, or is that a broader update on the kind of the stats on how we're responding to complaints?
Don't know. I've not got the one. What's the exact wording? So I think that's probably something that we agreed to take off, because we said that because we'd reported on the ICO report. And then the update on it. So I think that's probably, I'll double check that, but I think that's probably something we'd previously agreed to take off. Thank you, James.
Thank you, James, for that, and we'll take on board what you've said there. The recommendation here is that we approve the work programme. Is that fine with everyone? Thank you. And that concludes the Audit and Standards meeting for today. Have a great evening.